now the moment you've been waiting for. Dr. Robert Dietz.
I've been waiting for it too, so any chance to get on the stage, right? I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that the Federal Reserve is going to begin lowering interest rates this year. The bad news is they're probably only going to do it one time, and we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for that to occur. We think that's going to occur in December. And what better way to build confidence before I do an economic forecast than showing you how we missed our interest rate forecast back in December. So we'll just kind of elephant in the room. We'll get it out of the way up front. We thought back in December when we built the interest rate forecast, and you can see this in the section in blue where it says NAHB, that the 10-year Treasury rate, which is the key rate for business lending and for mortgage interest rates, that was going to average 4.15% during the second quarter. Now, the good news is this morning it's hovering right around 4.2, so we can maybe claim a little bit of credit right at the end. But the quarterly average for this quarter was closer to 4.5. So we were off by about 35 basis points. Now, why did that happen? I'm going to give you some explanations in terms of the overall economy. Part of it was that 2023, in terms of GDP growth, it ended the year stronger than we expected it to be. So the good news here is, if you look at the forecast, we don't have any negative quarters going forward. In fact, this looks an awful lot like the soft landing that the Federal Reserve is trying to engineer. Although, as I've been telling people, you kind of have to squint and ignore those 2 quarters of economic decline in 2022, which I think at the end of the day, maybe it'll be 12 months from now, they're going to do a look-back exercise and say, you know what, we had kind of a rolling recession in 2022 and 2023. But after that red vertical line, which is our forecast window, slowing growth, but ongoing growth, and that's going to be supportive of housing demand. Now, why has the economy done a little bit better in 23 than we expected? One of them is a big topic of conversation among economists here in Washington, and that's the number of immigrants that came into the United States in 2023. Now, I don't want to get into the politics of this. This is just a pure measurement issue. But what you're looking at here is population growth for the entire country. Now, the portion in red is what's called natural growth. It's births that exceed deaths. The part in blue, which is a rising share of total population growth, is immigration. In 2023, the Census Bureau initially estimated there were 1 million people that came into the country. The Congressional Budget Office, using Department of Homeland Security data, said no, it wasn't 1 million. It was 3 million people that came into the United States. Like I said, now obviously an election issue, a political issue, but it meant that there was more people here, and that meant more people spending money, looking for apartments and everything else. So that was one of the factors that really kind of helped drive some of the GDP gains at the end of last year. The other thing is there's a lot more spending occurring on credit cards. Now, this is one that is not sustainable, and it is a problem in terms of consumer spending. It's the reason that in our economic forecast we have growth slowing. So as an example of that, I put up on this slide the personal savings rate. It's the share of national income that's basically saved. You can see in April, 3.6%. That's half of the 2019 level, which was above 7%. It's less than the 2013-2019 savings rate, which was close to 5%. In fact, if you looked at a credit card statement recently, interest rates on credit card debt, which are up about 30% in terms of the total amount of credit card debt over the last year and a half, the average interest rate is like 25%. So, those people who are out there spending that supported the economy, that's going to stop as those credit card bills begin to come due and those interest payments increase. Now, another place where we see evidence of cooling of the economy and slowing growth, which is good news in terms of thinking about what the Federal Reserve is going to do next, is in the job market data. The unemployment rate has increased to 4%. It was as low as 3.6 just in the last few quarters. So that's the red line here. We don't think it's going to increase very much more. It will continue to go up. We've got it going up to maybe a top rate of about 5% as corporate layoffs and hiring freezes affect the labor market. But where you can see the real cooling of the job market is in that blue line. That's the measure of open, unfilled jobs in the U.S. economy. And we've been saying for a while, we think this number's got to come somewhere between 7 and 8 million. And in April, it was at 8.06 million. So once it gets down in that 7 to 8 range, I think the Federal Reserve will feel more confident about the ability to begin to ease. And again, I think that happens later this year. State by state, job markets, obviously this is really important for home building demand. You don't want to be in one of the states in red, unfortunately. We've got 6 states and the District of Columbia that still have not recovered all the jobs that were lost during the COVID recession. So more work to be done. If you're in one of those states, go tell your policymakers to fix their local job markets. Job recovery has taken 4 years in those states. On the other hand, on the left side of the screen, you've got the winners. Idaho and Utah are kind of in a class of their own. 12% job growth in Idaho since the COVID recession. So those are areas where the home building markets are responding to job growth and population growth. All right, so where do we stand on inflation? We actually have made a lot of progress. This is the Consumer Price Index. It was at 9% in June of 2022. But you can see that blue line. It's kind of stalled out over the last year in the 3 to 4% range. The Federal Reserve wants a related measure of inflation to come down to about 2%. So we're in that last leg, and I know you all have heard me say it before. That last leg is all about housing costs and housing inflation. The item in red, shelter inflation. It's still growing at above a 5% year-over-year growth rate. And here's the thing. If we added more housing supply, if we built more homes, built more apartments, that 5% number, if it was down in the 3% range, the inflation challenge would be over. The Federal Reserve can normalize and it would be mission accomplished. So it's that last leg is really connected to shelter inflation. And again, that's why it's not just the Federal Reserve that can fight inflation, but state and local governments by reducing the cost of development and building homes and apartments. And then I got to say, I added this slide. This was my wife's recommendation. She's an economist too. I think many of you know that. She called this slide "How Normal People Think About Inflation," not economists. So the line in red is the way economists think about bringing inflation down. It's the growth rate. So we're at 3.4. That means 3.4% year over year. The item in blue is what normal people think about inflation, which is the actual level of prices. And those prices since the start of 2020 are up at 22% higher. So the question I often get on the road is, are those prices going to come down as that fight against inflation occurs? The answer is no, right? What we're trying to do is slow the growth in prices down to 2%. It's not a return back to 2019. And that's certainly true for building materials. I know it's a concern in dealing with clients and trying to explain to them the overall price of building has increased roughly about 30%. Since the start of COVID. So just keep those two in mind when they talk about the end of inflation. By the way, that might also be part of the reason when people are polled and they're asked about the state of the economy, they don't feel so good about the economy. It's about the blue line, not the red line, in terms of thinking about their own household finances. All right, so where do we think the Fed's going to go? They've been on pause since July of last year. We met with the Chairman Powell and the governors of the Fed just in the last few weeks. Kind of similar meeting that we had last year. I think they were more focused on shelter inflation this time than they were a year ago. And I think the hints based on the inflation data and some of the commentary that we see from the Fed is they are going to cut this year. In our forecast, we've got it down to just one cut in December. The bond market still thinks we'll get 2. I think it's really unlikely that they will cut in September. And even though they'll deny this, I don't think they're going to cut interest rates right before the election. So if they cut twice, it'll probably be November and December. In our forecast, we've got them cutting just once in December. What is that going to do to interest rates? Well, this interest rate forecast, at least in terms of thinking about 2025, is relatively unchanged. You can see that red line moving lower. It's a pretty smooth line on this graph. There'll be some ups and downs. But I still believe by the time we get to the fourth quarter of 2025, we're going to be looking at an average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage as measured by Freddie Mac that begins with a 5.9, for example, just below 6%. And that's going to price in a disproportionate amount of housing demand and really drive the home building market higher, again, by the time we get to mid to late 2025. One other thing to keep in mind, in thinking about interest rates, for the last 2 years, we've been basically focused on inflation and the Fed. As we move into 2025, that's going to pivot. We're going to have to think more about fiscal policy. 2025 is going to be the debate over the Trump-era tax cuts and tax reform. So part of that discussion is going to be how big is the government's deficit. And I want to draw your attention to the blue line on this slide. That's the debt to GDP ratio. Look at where it was in 2006. It was at roughly 40% of GDP in terms of the size of the debt. That is, the total debt load was 40% the size of the national economy. Look at where it is today. It's at 100% of the size of the overall economy. And it's likely to go higher in the forecast. So the reason that matters for housing, for small businesses, the larger the debt load, more bonds that have to be sold to investors, the higher nominal interest rates are going to be. And I think that's going to be a question as we begin to move out of where the Federal Reserve is causing interest rates to be higher. We're going to be thinking more about fiscal policy, government spending, how much taxes, how big the government deficit is, and trying to restrain the government. Because if the government continues to issue this level of debt load, it will result in higher interest rates as we think about 2025 and 2026. All right, supply side. Labor shortage has been mentioned already. Ed Brady mentioned this number, 340,000 job openings in April. That red line is an intensity measure of how tight the labor market is. You can see it went down a little bit when the number of single-family homes under construction was down about 15%, but it is rising again. The skilled labor shortage really is one of those top issues that's going to be with us for the next decade. Building materials, we had a big run-up in pricing. Like I said before, that left building material prices about 30% higher than they were pre-COVID. Right now, we're looking at about a 3% year-over-year growth rate, and that gain is not being driven by lumber. I think we do face the risk of higher lumber prices in 2025. Keep in mind the tariff is still in place, but we're watching is other kinds of materials, and I put up an example of one here, which is copper. Copper prices are now 70% below pre-pandemic levels. So this is partly electrification, it's partly the enthusiasm over AI investment. So we're going to have to watch other kinds of building materials in addition to just lumber as we move forward in the preceding years. All right, forecast. First, I will start with something I think has gotten some media attention that's been a bit overplayed. So the area in blue here is resale inventory. It's a little less than half of probably where it should be. This is the housing shortage. The area in red is new construction inventory. And right now, new homes make up about a third of the homes that are on the market. Historically, it's been about 12%. But look at the month supply numbers. So right now, there's a 9.1 month supply number for new homes. Typically, anything above 6.5 would cause housing starts and housing permits to slow. It would represent an overabundance of supply. But that's not the situation right now. I think everyone in this room knows it. If you look at that text in blue, there's a 3.4 month supply of resale inventory. So when you combine new and existing together, you get that text in green, which is we have a 4.2 total month supply of inventory. That's well below 5.5. So if you see any media commentary talking about that 9-month supply on new homes and arguing it suggests that home builders are going to slow down, that's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because of the lack of the area in blue, which is the ongoing lean inventory for resale. To be sure, as interest rates move lower, though, and the mortgage rate lock-in lessens, we will see a rise in the blue. There's going to be more resale inventory competing with home builders as we move into 2025. All right, our national forecast, single-family starts. Declines in 22. The decline in 23 was a little bit smaller than we thought. We thought it would be at least 10%. Turned out to be 6%. Our forecast is relatively unchanged from what we had at the Builder Show. We expect single-family starts this year to total a little bit more than 1 million for a high single-digit % gain, and then getting into about 1.05 million in 2025. And you can see the blue line there in the forecast window, basically moving along the trend line that we were on prior to some of the COVID-era disruptions. Some geography, top markets. Take a look at the top markets. You notice something. They're all in the South. Now, this is the top markets by volume. 3 of the top 10 are in Texas. 3 of the top 10 are in Florida, and Houston and Dallas are kind of in a league of their own in terms of the overall size of the markets. Now, these aren't necessarily the fastest growing markets. They're just simply the biggest. In fact, some of the fastest growing markets are markets in the mountain states where you have a lot of population growth and job growth. But these are the top markets by volume. Apartment construction, the well-anticipated, well-expected decline in apartment construction starts is underway. We actually have revised lower the total level of apartment starts we expect this year to about a 28% decline, taking us to about 340,000 multifamily starts this year. We think that decline will continue into next year and then stabilize and then move higher. The wild card for multifamily construction is one of those slides at the very beginning of my presentation, which is the level of immigration. How many people are here? If that number has been underestimated, there's upside potential for multifamily construction as we move into, say, 2025 and 2026. And then remodeling. The remodeling market continues to be solid. Our quarterly surveys of remodelers have never dipped below 50 during the COVID period, so remodelers have remained a lot more positive about market conditions than single-family builders and multifamily builders. Got a little bit of a soft patch. This is nominal remodeling spending. It was a 0% growth rate for 2024, and then you can see gains in 25, 26. Aging housing stock, aging in place related remodeling. This is the low-hanging fruit when we talk about energy efficiency. I know our advocates will make this argument that we're focusing way too much on already energy efficient and resilient new construction. We need to fix that much larger, much less efficient existing stock, and I think those are bullish indicators when we think about the remodeling market in the years ahead. So with that, I want to thank you. My email address is on there, rdietz@nahb.org. I think we've got a couple of minutes to take some quick questions.